All right, we are back, and thank you so much for being with us here with the Talk of the Town this evening. And as promised, our special guest for this part of the show is the Commonwealth Attorney for the City of Martinsville, Joan Ziglar. And Joan, thank you so much for being with us. We appreciate you uh, taking the time out on a Friday afternoon to come in and be with us here on the program. Well, let's jump right into it.
Let's do it.
You ran for Commonwealth Attorney how many years ago?
First time was in 1997.
So you have been the Commonwealth Attorney now for 16 years? Is that right?
16 years.
Wow.
Yes, and I'm not nearly at the top of the seniority list. There are some who have been there for 40 years in their offices, 35. Prosecutors love prosecuting, so when they get the job, they tend to retire from it.
They tend to retire. Well, I know. Now, are you considered as one of the, they call it, what is it, constitutional officers?
Yes, I am.
Okay. Typically, when you mention that, and I think that history bears that out, that when a person has that position, as long as they do what they're supposed to do, it's pretty much, even though you have to run for re-election, it's a career position. But it seems like of late, we do have opponents that want to. In fact, now that I think about it, I think it was Randy Smith, wasn't it, that you ran against initially?
Yes.
He wasn't ready to quit when you beat him, was he?
No, he wasn't. Randy is still an asset to the Commonwealth Attorney Association. He still provides statewide assistance with computer issues, and his knowledge is vast, and he provides it to anyone who needs it. So
Yeah.
he's still out there playing ball with us.
Right. Do you like what you do?
I love what I do because it gives me a chance to do the two things I love: practice law and help others without having to charge them to do it. Since the state pays me, I don't have to say, well, before I can help you, you need to pay my fee.
Right.
I can provide that help because the state pays my salary and the city. And I love practicing law. I love helping other people, and this job combines both. So I'm in my niche.
You mentioned that the state pays your salary, and of course, when you talk about you love what you do, there's a lot of it to do. And I think with your opponent here, we were talking about the caseload in your office, and I know that was a real issue during a budget crunch back a few years ago. Tell us a little bit about that and how that sort of washed out. We don't hear any more about it, really.
Well, back then, Bill, we had a push
How
by
many
the
years? How many
governor.
years ago has that been?
It's been about 4 years.
Okay, all right.
The governor had cut our budget twice, and I had hired Clay probably a year, 6 months before that. And when it came time to take budget cuts, most Commonwealth attorneys were laying people off permanently. I had hired Clay. I had promised him that I could give him a job for as long as I was in office.
Right.
And at the end of the 4 years, whoever ran against me and won, or if I won again, then
It'd be up
I
to
could make
them.
the promise again.
Yeah.
And I didn't want to break that promise and lay him off because he was the last hired. So we all voted in my office to take a pay cut so that we could keep Clay on.
Wow.
And the budget was the issue. We had everything in line to do our cases, but the governor was saying you have to give people furloughs. And employment law says that you cannot lay people off and force them to work. If you're not paying them, they don't have to work. And the cases kept coming, the money kept dwindling. We took 2 voluntary pay cuts in my office to avoid cutting staff. And then the third one was when I said, okay, this is enough. I'm still not going to cut my staff, so I'm going to have to close the office, and maybe even for a month, in order to give my people the cut in salary, comply with the employment law that says I can't make them work if they're not being paid. So that was where the budget issues came in, saying we have to give you time off, but the cases kept coming in. They needed to continue to work, and during that time that we were going to be off, I was going to be available. Even though I had taken the same pay cut as my staff, I was going to be there to handle the cases.
How did that play out? How did it? What actually happened?
Fortunately, the budget did not get cut a third time, and at the end of the year, Clay came to my home and resigned. And when the next budget cut came, the next budget cycle, they decided not to fill that position. We were in a hiring freeze. So when he resigned, I was not able to fill that position, and we were okay.
So now the office stands with you as the Commonwealth Attorney. Who works in your office with you?
I have 3 assistants. Don Goodman is my deputy assistant Commonwealth Attorney. Paula Bowen is my juvenile justice career prosecutor, and then Alberto Herrero, who is our Hispanic prosecutor, fluent in Spanish and a great lawyer. And he's been with me for over a year now.
Give us some perspective of the volume that your office does in the course, however you want to do it, a month or a year, however, what kind of a caseload do you have now? What do you do?
Our caseload varies. Right now, we have a slump in cases in traffic, believe it or not. We have a slump in general district misdemeanor cases. In circuit court, we make it up with our special terms of drug raids and special indictments, so it fluctuates. All over the state, we're seeing a decline in the number of cases in the general district court. But when we're on, we're on. We could have, I think our last grand jury, we had 55 defendants and over 70 cases. And those cases all have to be resolved close to within 90 days in order to meet the speedy trial requirements. So when we get them up through general district court into circuit court, or we direct indict, then that's where the pressure comes, because the clock is running on speedy trial. So even if we have 100 cases for that one in term of indictment, that doesn't mean that that's all we're going to have, because then you have misdemeanor appeals. A lot of people appeal their convictions in general district court just to get the money together to pay the fine that they didn't have on the day in general district court. So the caseload can never be predicted, because we never know who's going to appeal, and we never know when we're going to be ready for a big term of indictments coming through drug raids.
Yeah.
So.
You mean you're not tipped off on these drug raids?
Well, I know about when they're going to be ready. But a lot of that depends on when the certificates of analyses are finished.
Right.
The state labs are under a lot of pressure now because of the Melendez-Diaz decision that says all analysts who testify, who prepare these certificates of analysis, now have to be present in court to testify if the defendant demands that they be there.
Right.
And in Martinsville, they demand that they be there. So the lab analysts are spending a lot of time in court rather than in the lab doing casework. And that has led to some backups in getting certificates prepared. So although I know typically when Vice is ready to make a move, sometimes we're delayed because we're waiting for the certificates of analysis.
Right. Well, now some folks tell me that you are pretty stern about not accepting plea agreements. You take folks to trial, and you want jury trials.
That is absolutely true.
So you're not denying it.
No. I'm very proud of the fact that the community gets to have a say-so in how crime is handled in the city of Martinsville. If we don't have jury trials, then it's going to come down to the Commonwealth Attorney deciding on plea agreements, to charge, what the punishment is, so the Commonwealth Attorney can act as the enforcer of the law as well as the judicial officer. Of course, the judge has to approve it. But I believe in a 3-tier system. I believe that my role is to enforce the law, the judge has a role to interpret the law, and that the legislature writes the law. Separation of powers is really important to me. I don't need to play judge by doing plea agreements in every single case. And if you do plea agreements, if one judge disagrees with you, you can say, okay, I want a different judge, and they have to grant it. So I don't like that. I like the judge to make the decisions. I like the jury to make the decision. When a jury hands down a punishment, that's a guide to me. This is what they think should happen in these cases. And yes, I demand a jury trial on 2 types of cases, every case that I can get. If you distribute drugs in the city of Martinsville, not just simple possession, but distribute to make money for profit, you're selling it to somebody else's child, I demand a jury on that. If you appeal a DUI from General District Court, or if this is your 3rd DUI and it's a felony, they are going to a jury, because I want to know what the public thinks about this. How does the community want to deal with it?
All right, let me interrupt you real quick just to make sure I understand. Now, you say that you take a DUI to a jury trial, but now this is after a person has been convicted of the DUI and they choose to appeal it.
That's correct.
Correct.
If they accept their punishment in lower court, they're done with me.
But what if you say they accept their punishment even though they're convicted. Suppose their reason for appealing it, which I would think is that they still don't believe they're guilty of the crime.
Then they get a brand new trial with a brand new decider of the fact, and that decider of the fact is going to be the jury.
Wow. Now, this is your office policy that you have. I mean, these are not part of the rules that are mandated.
That's correct. It's a lot of work, Bill.
Sure.
Getting ready for a jury trial is a lot of work. In fact, I have 2 jury trials. We stagger our juries. We have 3 jury trials set for each day, usually. The judge will stack them. Jury number 1, jury number 2, and jury number 3. I don't know what the defense attorneys are going to do, so I have to prepare, and my staff has to prepare for 3 jury trials each time. That is a lot of work. But I do that because I sincerely feel that distribution of drugs is the biggest problem we have in the city of Martinsville. And if we play around with it, it's going to get out of control.
All right, I'm going to get back to the interview here in a second, but I want to step aside because we're talking about these juries. It makes me curious. I get this card in the mail every so often that says you've been selected for jury duty. And I fill out the card and all the information on it, and I send it back. And I've been doing that for, 35 years, and I've never once been called.
Neither have I. I would love to be a part of a jury and see what they do in a jury room, how they come to a decision.
Because you don't get to be in that part of it, do you?
I never get to be in there.
Yeah.
So I would love to be on the jury, but I've never been called.
Well, see, I've covered a lot of court cases. Not so much recently, but I used to cover court pretty regularly. And I've always had the same fascination that what would it be like to be able to be inside and be a part of that process,
Well,
but
maybe your chance will come.
And I've wondered why, like maybe it might be because I'm a reporter that there might be some conflict when they look at it or something. I don't know. Or the fact that you're the prosecutor.
No one wants you on the jury because you do have a radio station. But I think when people who are involved in media, for the most part, when they do serve on juries, they respect the fact that what they're doing should be held private. Some don't. And every juror, as Judge Stone used to say, the right to speak is also the right not to speak. It's your choice. But I would like you to consider the fact that you have had a big impact on someone's life. Yeah. And be respectful of what you release. Right. But it's your choice if you're a juror to speak or not to speak to anyone.
Yeah. But, I think about it. I've covered trials that involved minors, and I've had the judge to call me up and tell me, I'll allow you to sit here and witness this trial, and you can cover it. But I forget what he threatened me with if I mentioned a juvenile's name.
Or his picture.
Or the picture, or I think even if I included a specific location, a residence, or whatever, then I forget what the threat was.
Contempt of court.
Contempt of court, okay. Can a judge apply those same conditions to a jury or a jury member based upon what that jury member's occupation may be or something like that?
No.
They're exempt from it.
Not with a juvenile. You cannot publish the name of a juvenile, but if a juror decides to go out and talk about what they did in the jury room,
Uh-huh.
then we're going to have to prove where it came from and exactly what was said. You
Right.
can't just say, we heard this and your name was attached to it. We have to prove that case against that juror just like we do any other criminal case.
Oh, my goodness. All right. I walked by one of your signs yesterday, and it said, vote Joan Ziglar, Commonwealth Attorney. And it said the lowest crime rate in 30 years.
Yes.
Tell us about that.
Well, these are statistics that I don't calculate. Mike Rogers basically keeps up with that, and he came to me last year. He
Well,
was
used
very
to.
happy. Yes,
He's retired
he used
now.
to. So I don't know if they'll be calculated ever again. That was something he took pride in, and he wanted to see the progression we were making in fighting crime. And I mean we, not just the police department, not just me, but the community overall. And our neighborhood watch people are invaluable to helping us get the crime rate down. But the statistics he got from the state showed that the crime rate was the lowest, especially in violent crimes, that we have had in 30 years. So that's all coming from another source that
Yeah.
I had nothing to do with.
All right, but you've got some idea as to why it is, do you?
Yes.
How come?
Because we have had tough enforcement, and we have had tough prosecutions, and we have had victims and neighborhood watch members say, I have had enough of this. I am not going to put up with it anymore. We are getting more calls to the police saying this is going on. Neighbors are watching neighbors' backs when they're not at home. If something is going on, people pick up the phone and call the police. A lot of times you can stop a crime when you let people know you're being watched. So that contributes. The fact that people do not want to come before juries contributes to them not committing crimes in the city of Martinsville. The fact that the judges are also tough on some of these crimes. People have gotten the message that Martinsville is going to take a stand. We are going to fight for our victims.
You know, and I've had Mike on any number of times. Mike and I go back years when he was a patrol officer. And it's about the same age. In fact, he started in law enforcement by the time I started in this business. But I remember one of the times us talking, he was telling me that the vast majority of crime that's committed in the city of Martinsville is either directly related to drugs or indirectly related to drugs. But any way you look at it, if you follow the root cause of that crime, almost all the time there's drugs involved. And one of the problems when you've got that element involved is cooperation of people when somebody gets charged in terms of producing evidence to get a conviction. Do you have that problem in the city of Martinsville? Is that considered to be one of your most difficult obstacles, is to get the cooperation of people in order to prove your case?
It is, but we have been blessed. And again, I think the policy I have of demanding jury trials helps us develop our informants, because once we get a street level dealer, if that person is afraid enough of jail and the amount of time we get, they are going to turn and say, if I help you, what will you do for me? So we develop our informants a lot of times through the negotiations. If you want to avoid a jury trial in the city of Martinsville, help yourself by helping us. That is the main reason you will not go to a jury in the city of Martinsville if you're caught distributing drugs, if you work with the police.
You, speaking of working with the police, you and the retired now police chief, Mike Rogers, you guys had a real good relationship, working relationship for a lot of years. What caused that? Was there anything particular that that caused you guys to have such a good working relationship?
From day one, I went into office and said, I don't like to plead out a lot of cases. I want to let these cases go through the system, see what the judge thinks of them by his rulings, see what the jury thinks of them by their ruling, And that will give me a guide as to what kind of cases really bother the citizens of Martinsville.
Mm-hmm.
Mike was thrilled when I said I will not be doing a great number of plea agreements. He read my brochures and my door hangers and said, "Are you really going to follow through on your promises?" And I said, "I promise you I will." And from that day forward, whatever I needed to get my job done, if I needed an officer to come in on his day off and he were available, Mike paid the overtime. If Mike needed me to come out in the middle of the night, rain, snow, sleet, whatever, if he dispatched an officer to pick me up, if I couldn't get out of there, I went. And when you have that type of relationship, if I call you and tell you I need you and you're there, you learn to trust each other. And Mike and I did that.
Mm-hmm. And just my experience with the friends I have in law enforcement, when they go through what they go through in order to effect an arrest, to not see that process go to its fruition to the end, and the guilty person, being punished for the crime, is a frustration for law enforcement. So it's obvious that they would be a supporter of someone that would take that kind of position. But
And I tell Mike all the time, now I won't be able to say that to him anymore. I'll tell Eddie, Cassidy, those are my babies too. They work so hard, and they are so disrespected night after night after night, and they keep the right attitude. They keep coming back to work for the low pay they get, for the treatment, the abuse they take, and they keep saying it's worth it. So when I get a chance to say I honor your work by taking it to trial, that makes them happy, and it lets them know that I truly appreciate what they're doing, instead of just saying, well, this is minor and this is not such a big deal, I'm going to plead it out. And when I do enter into plea agreements, I like to get their input.
mm-hmm.
I like them to have a say in what I do. A lot of times they'll say, "Joan, we trust you. Whatever you do is fine." But it's taken years to get to that point. We've developed that relationship now.
Let's talk about some of the, a lot of people think, well, the Commonwealth Attorney's Office is, it does what it does. But there are a number of programs here. I want to mention a few and get you to just take a few minutes. Gee, we're almost out of time here. And I've got some more to get to. But
Okay.
One is the Drive Legal program. Tell us what that is.
In Martinsville, if you believe it or not, one of the biggest problems we have is people driving without licenses. Their license has been suspended, or they never got a license.
Uh-huh.
If they are employed, if they're trying to get to work, if they're trying to get their child to school, they need to be able to do that. So if you get caught driving suspended, we will give you an opportunity before we convict you. We'll take the evidence. The judge will make a decision that the evidence is sufficient, but he will take that case under advisement, give you an opportunity to go get your license straight, and then if you come back with your license, we will reduce the charge to no OL so that your fines and fees will not be as high. You will get yourself licensed, and then when you go back to the DMV with your new fines, you can pay that immediately and keep your license. So
Wow.
we try to help people drive legal.
Why is it that there's so many people in Martinsville that drive without a license or a suspended license?
I have no idea, except that sometimes people forget to pay their fines.
Uh-huh.
Some people refuse to pay their fines. But then there's this group that can't afford to pay a fine when
Right.
they get a ticket, or they forget that they had the ticket. Many of them just may not have the money.
Mm-hmm.
And with our economy the way it is, the judge and I agreed, let's give them an opportunity to show us that they didn't really want to do this, and if given an opportunity to fix it, they will.
All right, the shoplifting diversion program. Now, we know that all shoplifters are looking for some diversion. Is that what this is about? No?
No. The shoplifting diversion program is our way of trying to keep young people who shoplift, and anyone else, for the first time. We had a child who was 18. I'll still call him a child. He was a father. His girlfriend was 18. They didn't have money for formula for their baby.
Mm-hmm.
He went out and stole it. and
stole the formula.
stole the formula to
Wow.
feed his child.
I remember that.
He
I
had
remember
no
that.
record whatsoever. In order to give him an opportunity to show us that this was an aversion, that this is not who he is, we came up with the shoplifting diversion program. Anyone who shoplifts for the first time, we try to get them back on the right track so that they will not end up with a criminal conviction. They have to take a class, they have to do community service, and they have to stay away from the property, work with us. We supervise the program. If they do everything that they're required to do, including the community service, pay the fees, and they prove to us that they are going to stay away from shoplifting, no violations whatsoever, then we forgive that shoplifting. And they walk away without a conviction. If they come back after completing the program, then we lower the hammer on them.
But that is an opportunity then. What about, there's an internship program too.
Yes.
Speak to that, if you will. Ruth.
I am so very proud of my internship program. I was counting the number of students who have interned with me and gone on to be lawyers. Stephanie Vipperman, who is the Commonwealth's Attorney in Patrick County, is one of the interns who I would say proved to be very, very successful. Jessica Spangler, who just got married, I think she's Henson now, is working with Robert Haley. I have an intern this summer who is working on the third year practice. She has been trying cases, and when she goes back to law school, she will be far ahead of the group because she's already had practical experience. But I have 4 local attorneys, students who've gone through the program and intern with me are now local attorneys. And then I have 2 who are attorneys in Roanoke and 2 that are sitting for the bar. And then I have mentored 103 altogether. So I'm very proud of that
103.
program. If we pull the young people to us and say, it's okay for you to see who we are, how we do our job, then maybe that will spike an interest in them to do something different with their lives, that they have had the opportunity to be around police officers. They get to ride with the police officers, see what they do. They get to go to court, observe the probation officers, observe the lawyers, talk to the judges who are very willing to sit down with them and tell them about being a judge and how all that happened. It's just an opportunity, and I was given that opportunity, so I want to give back to other young people. It really impacted my life. It let me see what happens in the courtroom, and I was mesmerized. I was hooked. I wanted to become a lawyer. And even those young people who want to go into social work, they see the side of what happens in the courtroom when people have issues. They get to go to J&D court on some cases, the adult cases mainly. They get to see what happens in violent relationships. They get to see what happens when you violate the law. It's just a really good experience for all young people. I wish I could afford to bring them on, and most of the interns have been paid.
Yeah.
So they earn money for school supplies, books, whatever they need. And I do this with high school, college, law school, any level of student. We do the groundhog shadowing program as well, where students in elementary school or middle school come over and hang out with us for a day and watch what we do. But I love being around young people who have everything ahead of them. And when they see that there's something to do in Martinsville, they come back.
Yeah, yeah. Does your office have anything to do with the jail and prison ministry?
Yes. I love working with the prisoners, but I cannot go into the jail because I cannot deal with the prisoners who are represented or unrepresented and facing crimes. But what I can do is when I go to church and we're finished with our Sunday school books, I can supply those to the jails. When they have their walk-a-thon, I can go and walk and raise money for them. When they have their breakfast, I can try to be there and support them. Once they come out of prison or out of jail, they have served their time. They deserve to be treated with respect. They deserve an opportunity to prove themselves. And I am all for that. So if I can support the ministry, which I thank God for what he has done for me, I'm all for that. I love the jail and prison ministries.
If you don't mind, I want to take just a little bit of extra time, and then we'll wrap it up. There's a few things I wanted to get to this evening we haven't. One thing I wanted you to speak to, and I've got the name, it's Alfred Martin, who was the person, and I was describing it as best as I could remember, I think, with when Clay was here, your opponent. This was the guy, and you correct me if I'm wrong, who ran away from his marijuana charge, I think, or conviction.
It was a conviction.
Conviction, pardon me. And ended up living a life in Michigan, exemplary, became a model citizen, and was he not brought back here to Martinsville to serve his time after years and years and years had passed?
He was.
Okay.
This was a case that Randy Smith handled many years ago. Back in 1974 is when it started. Randy Smith put his name in NCIC, which is a national database for criminals who are wanted. Mm-hmm. And when he got a speeding ticket, he got pulled over for something in Michigan. Back in 1976, 2 years after he escaped from a work detail, they tried to get Michigan to bring him back in 1976.
Two years after.
Later, yes.
Okay.
Michigan refused.
Why?
Because they gave him asylum. They were not required to cooperate. Later, the federal laws changed, the state laws changed, where we have a compact that if someone is in your state and they're wanted by another state, then you have to cooperate. Mm-hmm. Well, the law changed, and the asylum he was given in 1976 was no longer in place the next time he had contact with law enforcement, and that was 20 plus years later. Mm-hmm. If he had come back in 1976, when they first found out where he was, it would have been over with and done. But he didn't. And then when the laws changed and he got caught that many years later, then he had no choice but to come back. He fought extradition. The judge in Michigan said, "I'm sorry, you have to go." He came back here with some lawyers who had painted the city of Martinsville as a bunch of racist rednecks.
I remember, yeah.
Out to hurt this black man who has turned his life around, and there was nothing we could do. He had already been convicted, he had already been sentenced, and he was serving his time. If someone escapes from prison, you don't just leave them out there. You go look for them. We found him 2 years later, but our hands were tied. Mm-hmm. When our hands were released, and we were able to get him, we brought him back. But the story ends well. If you go back to the last election where I was challenged, he wrote a letter for me to the editor supporting me, saying that I was only doing my job. And he and I have remained friends.
What was his, I remember he ended up going to jail here for
Yes.
What period of time? How long was it?
When Ben Gardner got into the case and became his lawyer, and he dismissed his lawyers from Michigan who were stirring up all the problems,
Right.
we were able to sit down, work out an agreement. He served the time that he needed to serve. The escape charge was taken under advisement. If he did well, it would be dismissed. It was dismissed, and he served his time and went home.
All right. Now, when you mention, I've already promised I would ask you this, stirring up trouble. There's a black gentleman that calls in regularly on the coffee break, and he brought up the point that it was his understanding in the black community in Martinsville that there are a number of people that feel that you target other black people, that the conviction rate, not only is the arrest rate higher for black people than it is white people in the city of Martinsville, but the conviction rate is higher as well. And in fact, I think he had even made the point that your opponent is visiting predominantly black neighborhoods, making that point as part of his pitch to say, this is why you should vote for me. What is your response to that?
Well, first, if my opponent is making that pledge to them, then my opponent is saying, I will not follow the law. If you get arrested, I will do something and avoid following the law. That's not what a Commonwealth attorney is supposed to do. We are to enforce the law that is written on the books by the legislature. Secondly, I have never gone out and arrested anyone. Not one single person, even though I have the right, and you have the right to make citizen arrests. as a person who has the authority, I have not yet arrested a single person. I deal with the cases that are brought to me. I am not a judge. I do not hand out sentences. I present the evidence to the judge. The judge decides if they're guilty, and the judge sets the punishment. That's why I don't like making plea agreements, because they can't say Joan is favoring this person or Joan is persecuting that person. Let an objective third person make the decision, and then I can sit here today and honestly say, I do my job. I prosecute the cases that are brought to me. I don't go out looking for them. But with that said, Bill, when you have people on the West End calling into the police department constantly, pleading with the police department to do something about the drug deals going on in their community, when you have senior citizens who are afraid to be in their home at night, those calls are coming to us and we are taking them seriously. And I was out there last night doing door-to-door campaigning. I had more praise because they are saying, Joan, my point is this. If you don't do anything wrong, you don't have to worry about Joan Ziglar. She has no authority to do anything to you. It's only when you get arrested that she becomes a factor in your life. So they said to me, keep doing your job. Don't back down for anybody. And these naysayers and these negative people who want to say that you're being racist against your own race need to get a life.
Okay. I do want to ask you this because you're in a unique position to have a perspective on it that somebody from the outside looking in doesn't. And I know this has been a regular complaint on our morning show on the coffee break for years and years and years, particularly when we have these drug indictments that come down. There's a number of people in the black community that say we are being targeted, that if the police would fairly target a cross-section of the city, it wouldn't look like it does so heavily, the arrest indictment so heavily toward black people in the city of Martinsville. From your perspective, how do you see that? Do you see and again, I know you just explained in a way that because people from a predominantly black neighborhood are making more requests.
And
is that
if you
it?
go on to Mulberry, right now, when you drive past their houses, there are no gangs or people hanging out in the streets. If they're selling on Mulberry, which I do not doubt that it is taking place, we cannot just barge into somebody's home when they're dealing behind closed doors unless we have a reason.
Mm-hmm.
The people on West End who are getting caught are dealing on the streets. They're dealing to anyone who will sell. We send our informants anywhere they can make an end. Now, if you want to blame someone for saying that we are attacking the black community, the majority of our informants are black. The last drug roundup we had the highest number of whites arrested ever because we focused on prescription pills.
And that is predominantly a white crime as opposed.
More white people are dealing pills and prescription medication than
goodness.
blacks. And we are able to get in because the people who we caught buying them were white.
Mm-hmm.
And they turned state's evidence.
So it has nothing to do with whether they're black or white. It has to do whether they're breaking the law or not.
Exactly. And if you are going to sell drugs and do it in a public place and sell to anybody who approaches you, then you're asking for trouble. If you're going to go on to, and we had arrests on Mulberry. We had a lot of complaints about one particular house, and it took us a while, but we got in there,
Mm-hmm.
and we got the people arrested, and we are going to work those cases just like we do any other. It has nothing to do with race. It has to do with who is willing to inform, who is selling on the street, and who they're selling to.
All right, you mentioned gangs just very briefly there, and I wanted to give you an opportunity to speak to that. What do you have to say about the gang element in Martinsville? I know we see evidence of it from time to time, but how do you see it from your perspective?
Gangs have Gangs have been my number one issue since I've been in office as my prevention program. We did not have a gang problem when I first took office, but I started to see signs, some tagging, what I call wannabes trying to get footing. And when you have that, that's a sign that it's coming your way. So from day one in office, I started taking note of what was going on. We started doing prevention programs, and we're still mainly doing prevention programs. But we have also had 3 gang-related murders in the city of Martinsville. And when you think that we don't have gangs, people are coming here from New York, they're coming here from other states. These are hardcore gang members, and they're reaching out to our children.
What is their interest here?
Drugs.
It's the drugs.
It's drugs.
Yeah.
As Mike said, the majority of our crime, and I will venture to say 75 to 80% of our crime is drug related.
Yeah.
And the gangs are here to make a profit. They want to move in and sell drugs. They want to get your children to serve as their mules because the law is very lenient with young people. They can get away with it until they turn 18. They'll go to juvie, as they call it, and they will use these kids and say, take one for the team, take one for your gang. You do this, and your punishment is going to be minor, and you're going to get more respect in your gang. You're going to be promoted. And these young people are falling for that. And then they go in, and they come out even harder. But what are we supposed to do? Nothing? Stand there and just let them get away with dealing drugs, committing murders? We can't do that. If we don't fight the gangs, we're going to be just like Danville within a matter of a couple of years.
Wow. We appreciate you allowing us the extra time. We had 30 minutes allotted. It's been 45.
Oh, wow.
But it's gone fast, and I appreciate you taking the time to talk with us and also for addressing the questions that we asked.
You're very welcome.
And as we always do with folks running for office, the incumbent Joan Ziglar, I'd like to give you an opportunity to make your appeal to the voters of Martinsville and to ask them for their vote for you this November. And I believe if you'll look at the camera that's yours, the floor is all yours.
Again, I know you know who I am, but my name is Joan Ziglar. I am your Commonwealth's attorney. I love my job. I have done all I can to be a good Commonwealth's attorney. The crime rate has come down. The number of young people involved in the criminal justice system is declining. That is because we are doing our jobs. The community has joined with me and with the police department to reduce crime in Martinsville. If we want an area where we can draw employers here, increase our employment levels, then we are going to have to continue to fight crime, and you need a prosecutor in office who is not going to let down and let the gangs take over, let the young people lose their lives because they're given one chance after the other with no consequences to go out there and deal with even more hardened criminals than they have in the past. You need a prosecutor who is willing to stand up and take the criticism and say what needs to be said. You have that with me. And when you have me in office, you also have someone who respects everyone, because I grew up hard with very little income, having to work on a tobacco farm, work my way through poverty in order to get to where I am today. So I understand a lot about what is going on with people who don't have a lot and grew up without a lot, but they want to be somebody who is giving back to society. I am your Commonwealth's attorney, and I ask you to re-elect me on November 5th of this year. Thank you.
That's Joan Ziglar, Commonwealth Attorney, and again, thank you so much.
Thank you, Bill. I appreciate it.
Folks, stay with us. We've got a little bit of time left on the show this evening. We'll take a break right now and be back with some closing thoughts right after these messages. Stay with us.